Hi, my name's Tom Albright, and I'm at the University of Nevada at Reno, venue for the 2021 Landscape Ecology North America Conference, I'm happy to say. And I'm also happy to represent my collaborators, Thomas Gillespie from University of California, Los Angeles, Jurgen Guevara from Centro Humboldt in Nicaragua, in Managua, and PhD student Lauren Phillips, also from University of Nevada. So just a brief overview of Nicaragua. It's the largest country in Central America. It has a diversity, quite a diversity of landscapes, large tracts of broadleaf forest, some dry forest, and it's also a place that's undergoing pretty rapid change. It's got a relatively young protected area network, and it had been experiencing fairly rapid economic growth. But in 2018, they began a series of socio-political sort of upheavals, and as well as a number of environmental challenges that have been accelerating. So what we're trying to do with this work is take a snapshot of the protected area network and look at how it compares to the diversity of landscapes in Nicaragua, sort of its representativeness. And we're also wanting to look at a number of anthropogenic pressures that seem to be manifesting in the network. And I do want to point out that many of the protected areas, and I'll transition to the next section here, are in the eastern part of the country, which is an area of high indigenous autonomous regions and management. However, how that's actually happening in practice is not always clear. So here's our network and our network of protected areas. We've divided these into 6 regions to maintain some homogeneity of physiography as well as geographic proximity. And another thing that we've done is for each protected area, we're trying to look at inside the protected area as well as adjacent areas using buffers. And in some areas that didn't really lend themselves to a buffer, we included the officially designated buffer zones for some of these biosphere reserves. Point out a couple. This is the reserve of Boschetti, one of the largest, sort of the crown jewel of the Nicaraguense protected area network. And here's Indio Maíz, and here's Cerro Huahuachang. These are 3 areas I'll be talking about a few times during the presentation. And we're using a variety of remotely sensed and GIS data in order to do that. And rather than introduce those, I'll just show you what we found. Very briefly, just a couple things to think about in terms of how the protected area network is laid out. In the Caribbean East and parts of this Central Highlands here, the protected areas tend to be low and large. And in the Pacific coast, they tend to be small and high. Now, there are exceptions. There are some coastal areas and wetland areas, but in general, that's the basic trend. They do a good job of covering the diversity of climates, the warmest, the coolest, the most wet, as well as to some extent the dry corridor of Nicaragua and through here. Unsurprisingly, they focus on areas of forest cover, in particular broadleaf rainforest, but also some of the conifer savannas that there are, a little bit perhaps underrepresented in dry forests in the Pacific regions. Protected areas also tend to cover wetlands and actually some of the barren areas in the high volcanic peaks. Okay, so some of the things we found, and this is kind of the punchline right here. We're not the first to report this by any means, but we're reporting in a certain way that we think will be kind of helpful. We're using the University of Maryland data set for forest cover and forest loss. And what we see is the vast area of forest that was more or less contiguous is really starting to be eroded with the agricultural frontier. A lot of folks moving from the Pacific region into this area with cattle raising at the expense of the native ecosystems, as well as at the expense of some of the indigenous land practices and rights. I do also, so huge forest loss in through here, and note a lot of this includes some of the protected areas. Cerro Huahuachang basically seems to no longer exist in any real form of a protected area, and even into the southern region of the Boschetti Reserve. I do want to point out this area of forest disturbance, we gave it a different color because this is almost exclusively attributed to the 2016 hurricane disturbance from Hurricane Otto. Forest loss is a little bit lower in the core protected areas compared to the comparison regions. So we don't want that point to get lost amidst all the bad messages, bad news about the forest loss. Looking at a few other dimensions, population density, we use as a metric the published average population density in protected areas globally, which is approximately 20 people per square kilometer. As a benchmark, and we've highlighted the areas that exceed that. Do want to be careful to point out that population is not in itself necessarily a bad thing. There are many indigenous people living in protected areas. However, when we see large spikes and we see rapid development, that definitely tells us something to be concerned with. And note that the protected areas, the log scale here, have a much lower population density compared to the areas adjacent to them. Nicaragua has some areas of the country where burning is a regular feature of the landscape, in particular the pine savanna area of the Northeast, as well as the Northwest in the Pacific and the dry corridor. Protected area burning is quite a bit lower than outside of the protected areas, but we do find some protected areas that have a lot of fires occurring with them regularly. So just to bring home a few basic points about this, don't want to lose sight of the fact that Nicaragua does have a very impressive protected area network, at least on paper, and they've made some progress in that. They also have areas of indigenous land management, play a really important role in protecting those ecosystems for themselves and for humanity. And this includes contiguous landscapes. However, we are seeing really, really alarming and rapid loss in some areas with forest cover. And this is a threat to the ecosystems themselves, as well as biodiversity and the benefits that these bring to people. Bringing this into the global context, the world is experiencing climate change, which is accelerating. We have a global public health crisis right now. There's some reports that is being exploited in order to monetize certain ecosystem services and environmental resources. And in Nicaragua, on top of those factors, we have since 2018 simmering sort of social political crisis. And so this may be kind of a perfect storm for a lot of things to happen. So I'd urge you to keep your eyes on Nicaragua and other countries that are experiencing some of these. Thank you very much for sitting through my talk.